everyone, Professor August here, and in this video I'll be talking about Hijab Butch Blues by Lamya H. It was published in 2023, and this is the second time that I read the book. I first read it when it came out a couple years ago, and I just rushed through it because the synopsis seemed really cool, and I wanted to see queer Muslim voice. And so I thought it was a good book when I first read it, and I've assigned it to my students, and I wanted to read it again just to see if that initial impression I had of the book a few years ago uh, stuck with me, and if I still think the same thing about the book. And I have to say, I do. It was actually even better the second time I read it because I knew the story. I knew what this person had gone through and what their life was like as a queer Muslim who is from South Asia, raised in the Middle East, and went to school in the United States. And it was just nice to see a queer voice, somebody who is Muslim and is exploring their sexuality and their relationship with religion, their relationship with race and class. So this time when I read it, I knew the story, so I was able to pay more attention to detail and more like gauge whether or not I agree with the way that the story is framed and the way this person um, interrogates religion and different social issues. And for the most part, I think I agree with pretty much everything in the book. I think like the interesting thing is I read this book and the second time around, it almost seemed like Quranic exegesis, like just a discussion of religion and the characters and the people, the prophets in the Quran, and how these people's lives impacted humanity, and how this one author, Lamya H, has a relationship with these individuals in the Quran and thinks about them and what their lives were like, what their lives mean to us living in the 21st century. So it brought up a lot more the second time than it did the first time. So I'm really glad that I signed this book to my students because I think it'll bring up a lot of interesting conversations. This book is a memoir written by Lamya H. Lamya H is a pseudonym for the author. And in the last chapter of the book, we get an explanation of why the author chose to write with a pseudonym. In fact, when you start reading the book, the author doesn't tell us where she's from. Just from context clues, I'm assuming she's from Pakistan because like her family speaks Urdu. They grew up with a version of Islam that seems really familiar to the version of Islam that I grew up with. And she mentions like taking vacations in like near the ocean, so I'm like, guessing it's Pakistan. And then her family moves to the Middle East for like a better life. Her dad finds work there, and again, we're not told where they move. I'm assuming it's Saudi Arabia or the UAE, something like that, somewhere in the peninsula. And this is again just context clues. We know it's an Arab speaking country. We know that women have more restricted rights there. We know that there's a huge class issue in the country that they move to. So white people, like foreign white people, are the dominant, like treated really well, and then local Arabs are like mid tier, and then South Asians, like her family, are like too brown and too dark, so they're the bottom tier. So like these are just context clues. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, where she's from and where she moves to, because the story that she's telling us about her life is one of self discovery and the interrogation of religion and sexuality, how she can bridge those two things together, and how, in certain respects, religion really has helped her figure out her sexuality, and how sexuality has, in turn, helped her figure out her religion. So, like, place isn't that important. And then later in the book, she moves to the United States, to New York, to go to school, and she kind of creates a life in the US. So, like, yes, location kind of matters in the US just because, like, she's creating a new social network with her friends and a religious network with friends and, living a normal life in New York City. So, I suppose that matters just for our sake to know that she's able to do that in the United States. Anyways, so the book follows her from childhood when her family has moved to this Arab country, and she talks about religion, and it is super well done. Like, the way that this book is written is really well crafted. Each chapter, like each part of the book, follows a prophet or an aspect of Islam, and then within that story of either a Quranic character or a prophet, the author, weaves her own life narrative and makes comparisons to these prophets or aspects of Islam and how they relate to her. So the book opens up with Maryam, or the Virgin Mary, and how the author, like reading about and hearing about Maryam in school, just like it triggered something really positive in her because she notices something about the Virgin Mary that she connects with. And I just thought, like, this is a brilliant way to um, insert oneself into religion, because it's like religion in her view and in my view is not something that's meant to be restrictive. It's meant to guide and help and, you know, flourish our lives and sort of feed us as we go through our lives. And so like that little moment in the beginning of the book, I was like, okay, this is a cool interpretation of aspects of Islam that we normally don't get through tafsir or through exegesis, like religious discussions of religious texts. So she's doing her own version of excavation, trying to figure out what the religion is and who these people are. And it's really interesting the way she does it. So the structure is actually kind of like follows that. So the book opens up with Maryam, and then each chapter kind of focuses on some aspect of Islam. So I'm going to put up like right here the different chapters that she has. You don't have to know Islam to understand who these people are. If you're of an Abrahamic faith, like you'll know who these people are. If you're a Christian, you probably already know these stories. So like it's just the Arabic names for these prophets. So Maryam is the Virgin Mary, Yunus is Jonah, um, Noah is Noah. I don't know. Musa is Moses. So like they're just the Arabic names. So, but if you know the characters in the Bible, then you'll know the characters in the Quran. So the structure is really cool. Each of these people or these prophets that she talks about, the author talks about, uh, she like explains the character or the prophet, the story, and then moves to her own life, and then gives us a little snippet of what her life was like in her childhood or in her young adulthood or as an adult. And then she goes back to the stories in Islam, and then she goes back and forth. So it's really well done because um, the parts about the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, does not seem didactic in any way. It's just here's what the story is, here's an interpretation from a queer person, and here's how it relates to my life. So I thought the way that she crafted this is great. I'm a queer Muslim. Like I grew up in Los Angeles. I did not grow up in a particularly religious household. So my family, like we were Muslimish, right? Like we celebrated the holidays, but that's about it. Like our family was not the one where, you know, the women would wear hijab and the men grew beards and like would go pray at the mosque. It's just not the way we grew up. But the older I get, the more religious I become. And I think that's really interesting, just like in my own family and in my own life, because I think I haven't taken a survey, but I'm pretty sure out of like everybody in the family, I'm probably the most religious. Um, Actually, I probably would bet that I am. And that's just a personal thing. Like I've found religion and faith to be super important in my own life. So it guides me and helps me to get through my life. It helps me get through a lot of trouble, difficult situations, the same way that it does for the author. But the author has an experience that I have also faced, which is within the Muslim community, queerness is just, it's such a taboo subject. So it's almost taboo just to even talk about it. Um, and so within Muslim groups, it doesn't even come up. It's viewed as being something that's disabling. It's like a test from God. It's a disorder. I mean, like you name the homophobic trope, and it exists within religious groups. On the flip side, within my queer groups, uh, it's the reverse. Like religion is the suppressive thing. It is holding people back. It isn't helpful in any way. And that's just not been my experience with religion, and it's not the experience that this author has had. In fact, those two things have worked really well together. They mesh really well together because our personal interpretations of the religion have helped us grow and have helped us, I don't know, go out on limbs and take risks in our personal lives to help us and to fulfill our lives and make our lives bigger than we could have imagined. And so it's really interesting to see from her perspective how she's done that. Um, she lingers on this issue of anonymity, and the reason she does that is because she feels that in order for her to be productive and to make actual change in society for the better, it's really important for her not to be out in the open with her name and her address out there for people to find. And so I totally respect that. I think that's totally great. Um, like, it's not like, I don't think it's a place of other people to out anybody for any reason, whether it's sexuality or religion. And so it's actually really cool that she was able to write this book and get it through the publishing process, um, about her own life, with the publishers being cool with anonymity. Because without the anonymity, I don't think the story would have been told. And I think it's an important story for us to have, because it really does parallel some of the things that I've gone through. I know it parallels the things that a lot of other people have gone through, where you feel rejected either by the queer community because of your religion, or by your religious group because of your sexuality. And there are those of us who are in that liminal space between queerness and religion, and we want both of those things in our lives because they are, um, really rich aspects of who we are as individuals. And we all have different identities that we cling to. Some of us, I don't know, we call ourselves Christians and Jews and gay and lesbians and capitalists and socialists and black and white and Asian. I mean, whatever identity you have, everybody has something that they cling to. And in my case, it just so happens that my religion is super important to me, but also it's not going to hinder, or it's not going to change who I am as an individual. I am who I am, and my religion helps me understand who I am, and it guides me. And so I really appreciated the way that she laid this out in the book. Um, and just gave voice to this segment of a global population that exists. We exist in the United States. We exist all over the world. It just so happens that sometimes we feel, I don't know, sequestered or quieted by other groups who don't want us to have space in their space. So I like that. I appreciated that aspect about this book. This is a great narrative, a great memoir. That's why I assigned it to my students. And I'll probably keep assigning it to my students, because for people, like, we live in a place in the Bay Area that has a lot of Muslims. We have a lot of South Asian students. We have a lot of queer students. And so sometimes, like, they don't mix. And so this is a nice, tidy narrative, a memoir that might ease people into conversations that they might not have. So students who don't deal with gender and sexuality will now have a way to discuss gender and sexuality, or students who don't discuss religion will have a way to discuss religion. I'm not saying everybody who reads this book is going to agree with the book, just because I agree with the way that the author interprets religion and interprets the way that one can live a queer Muslim life. That's my personal opinion, because I'm living proof that it can be done, and the author is also living proof that it can be done. It is just a perspective that often is left out of conversations. And so this is a book that will allow students to have that discussion, either, with their friends, with their families, in the classroom, however it happens. It's a relatively short book. I mean, it's just shy of 300 pages, and it goes by fairly quickly. Um, Aside from the names in Arabic for the chapters, it's pretty easy to read and understand, because there's not a lot of religious jingo. What is it called? Jargon. There we go. A lot of jargon in the book. So, if you're not super familiar with religion, it's not a big deal, because the author does a pretty good job of just, like, laying out the different stories in the Quran, and who these people are, these prophets are, what these aspects of Islamic doctrine are. So, like, it's not a difficult book to get through. And then also, there's not a whole lot of, like, super critical um, gender or sexuality theory in the book. This is just a person's experience with gender and sexuality, so it makes it pretty easy to read, just by, it's not bogged down with super intense theoretical, academic discussions. So that's really helpful, just to make it a quick, easy read. Also, there are aspects in this book that are about class and race, which I think are super interesting. So I really appreciated that, because, like, living in the United States, we understand how much race plays an issue in our day to day lives, especially for those of us who are of minority backgrounds. And so the author discusses race overseas, like where she comes from and where she grew up. And then also when she first arrives in the United States, it is kind of just jarring for her how, I don't know, just woven into the American fabric race is, and the discussion around race is. So that's also just an added layer in this book. Anyways, I feel like I'm going on and on and on. it's a good book. I really enjoyed it. If you want to read a copy of it, I've left the publisher's information in the discussion box below. You can buy a copy. If you've read it, let me know what you think. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy. I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe below. Catch you in the next video.